and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome and introduce again Dr. Robert Murphy, Executive Director of the Robert J. Havey, MD, Institute for Global Health, and the John Philip Fair Professor of Infectious Diseases here at Northwestern Feinberg School of Medicine, who answers your COVID questions and addresses the latest COVID headlines every Tuesday and Thursday here on the Havey Institute for Global Health's Facebook page. And today, Dr. Murphy will be answering viewer-submitted questions and addressing the latest COVID headlines through today, the 9th of December. And we invite you to continue to submit those questions to us via Facebook at NU Institute for Global Health or by email at globalhealthinstitute@northwestern.edu. And leading the discussion again today is Sophie Biskowski, who is a student research assistant with the Institute. So Sophie, I now turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kristen. Hi, Dr. Murphy.
Hi, good morning, and congratulations on finishing your finals. Sophie's at Northwestern.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. And now for some updated COVID statistics. In the United States, we have finally hit the milestone of 60% of the population is fully vaccinated as of yesterday. And while that isn't enough, it is an important milestone to note. The 7-day average of cases is now at around 119,000. And we are seeing a 27% increase over the last 14 days. The US yesterday saw 113,000 new cases. And we are unfortunately seeing a huge spike in hospitalizations and deaths, with hospitalizations having increased 19% and deaths having increased 13%. In Illinois, we are also seeing a massive spike in cases with a positive rate of 7,283 for the 7-day average. And yesterday in Illinois, we saw positive cases of around 7,000. What can you tell us about, Illinois increasing 58% in cases over the last 14 days?
We need 90% of the population vaccinated. That's the problem. And we're not there yet. We're going in the right direction. It's slow, but we need to accelerate that. Otherwise, these peaks in cases, these peaks translate into hospitalizations and mortality later. And that is really critical. And we know now from the data around the country that those hospitals are mostly full in the 80 to 90% range of persons who are unvaccinated, and the ones who die the same. 80 to 90% of the people who are dying in the United States now from COVID are unvaccinated. That is who's driving these statistics. And it's just a catastrophe. Once you get severe COVID, and it's too late to take the vaccine in the hospital. You can't. People beg for the vaccine in the hospital, but it doesn't work that way. It doesn't help. It's too late. So we know now, right now, it's all about Delta. Omicron has not taken over in the United States yet. Maybe it will. That's another issue altogether. But a recent study from Israel confirmed just what I said. Israel's a couple months ahead of the United States in getting everybody vaccinated. Most people there are vaccinated. And 840,000 people, and this again is just mostly Delta, 90% decrease in the death rate and the hospitalization rate. It's just so obvious around the world what's happening. And the only places where that number is blunted are places where there's greater than 90% vaccination. That is just one of the things that's really going to help a lot. People that are, there are still people with vaccination who are in the hospital, but they tend to be older. They tend to have an average of about 4 underlying risk conditions. So they're really sick, and they're just too fragile to make it through a COVID breakthrough pneumonia. It's unfortunate. Whereas the unvaccinated ones who are in the hospital are younger, down into the 20s and 30s even a few children. It's a different ballgame, and they have less risk factors. Maybe they could have none, or they could have 1 or 2. The average, I think, is 2. So it's a different ballgame, and the hospitals are just crying out for help because they're completely overwhelmed, and it's starting to impact general medical health because they can't deal with all the regular stuff when they've got all these COVID patients in there that are taking up beds and taking up ICU beds and ventilators and basically dominating the scenes at these hospitals. And the district hospitals that typically take referrals from the small community hospitals are completely overwhelmed. And many of them, particularly like in Western Michigan, can't take the referrals anymore. So where do those patients go? They probably don't go anywhere. They probably just stay there. And they can't get the intensive care that they need. So it's a very sad thing. And it's just happening around the country right now, this thing. We've got Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, and Illinois now with big increases in numbers. We're in this wave, and we got to do everything we can to bring it down, which includes vaccination. It's include, mandating masks in public places. In your home, you do what you want. But if you're around other people, you should be wearing a mask and keeping staying away from crowded indoor spaces, particularly with the mixture of vaccinated and unvaccinated people.
Yeah, definitely. And, speaking of vaccinations, one of the big headlines that we saw in the last 24 hours is that Pfizer is now saying that the booster shot protects against the Omicron variant. What can you tell us about this protection that Pfizer is hopefully seeing in their new study?
Yeah. So what they're reporting here, the CEO of Pfizer yesterday on NBC's Today Show, is that in the laboratory, the antibodies from people who are boosted are neutralizing the virus. It's a nice sign, but it's a laboratory test. We'll see what happens with these 840,000 patients in Israel. We'll see what happens if Omicron does take over in the United States. We're not sure it will, because Omicron has a big fight against Delta. So the issue in South Africa was they had almost no cases when Omicron was introduced. So there was no competition. These viruses don't have brains. They don't think, they don't care who you are. They're just you're a human. They want to get in there and replicate. So we don't know if Omicron will take over. It appears to be more transmissible. So most people think it probably is going to take over, but that remains to be seen. And it also remains to be seen how serious of disease this causes. There's some, again, laboratory experiments that say, and some anecdotal clinical information that the cases that have been reported so far have been very mild, and that the hospital rates are not going up that much in South Africa in particular. And they have very good reporting there, by the way. So we don't know what Omicron is going to do. Is it going to be more transmissible but less dangerous? All that has to play out here. We're not going to know really for a matter of time. As a matter of fact, there's so much going on with Omicron right now. And relatively little virus in the country at this point, although about half the states are reporting cases, but they're a small single-digit percentage compared to Delta right as of today. But next Tuesday, on our Tuesday show here, we're going to do an Omicron summary of what we know today, because the information is literally coming out by the hour. So we'll figure that out.
Yeah, definitely. And now for the second COVID headline. 6 states are accounting for more than half of the country's recent COVID hospitalizations. Can you tell us which states these are and what we're seeing, et cetera, and how we can, what we can do with the numbers that we're finding?
It's basically, excuse me, it's basically what I said.
Yeah.
We've got to use everything in the toolbox. Promote the vaccines, keep people out of crowded places, kind of unfortunately separate the unvaccinated from the vaccinated. The Europeans are doing this in a very big way. To get inside any public or private building, you have to show the documentation of your vaccine status. Unvaccinated people can come to like eat outside or get whatever it is they need outside. There is actually in France, they have a plan where you can show your CDC vaccine card to a registered pharmacist, and they have small pharmacies everywhere. The pharmacist can enter your US data into their system. And so that it's easier for you to get around into the restaurants and hotels and stuff where you're interested, or museums where you want to go. So they're doing much more of that than we are here. Here it's still very much a voluntary system, which obviously is not working. So yeah, no, it's just, the cases are just increasing so much. And it's just because it's winter and there's too many unvaccinated people.
Yeah, it's incredibly sad. And now for some of our COVID questions. This individual is a 70-year-old clinical psychologist who works full-time. They're in very good health with no underlying conditions. They received their second Moderna shot in February, but they had a pretty severe adverse reaction to the vaccine, which included dry heaving, double vision in the morning for 5 to 7 days, and very significant balance issues, which required 4 months of physical therapy. They feel about 95% okay. And they were wondering your opinion on whether they should get the booster or not, as they have 2 altering physician recommendations.
Yeah, this is a tough case because this is a very severe vaccine reaction, and it is a vaccine reaction. There's no doubt about it. Thank goodness that the person has almost 100% recovered, close to that. However, the double dose of Moderna is going to fail at some point. And the question is what to do. I would not take the Moderna for this person, not take the Moderna vaccine or even the Pfizer vaccine. I think they're just too close in the design. I think one option is for this person to take the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is a very good vaccine and really provides a lot of what they call the cellular immunity versus the antibody immunity. And maybe that is one option that this person has, but it's really a personal decision. There's no right or wrong what this person does. If they don't take the booster, they're at much higher risk for getting infected. And we're in this peaking epidemic now, pandemic now. So it's very high risk out there. And if Omicron comes, this is really bad because it's at least twice more infectious if it does take over. One thing I would ask this person to do is to make sure that they fill out a VAERS report, VAERS, that's the vaccine adverse reporting system that the FDA has, voluntary system. Very easy to do. A person can do it themselves, but there's a little bit of a technicality, so sometimes it's better for the doctor to fill it out. I fill them out for patients all the time. But when they have an adverse reaction that I'm confused about. So, but this person or their doctor, but anybody can fill it out. So this person should have one of those filled out because it's a very unusual reaction and it's very disturbing and very unfortunate. I'm glad they've gotten better. And I wish I had a really good answer for them, but I don't. I personally would take the J&J vaccine if it was me, but I don't have a strong recommendation for this particular person. So I think they're otherwise in good health. So, hopefully it will be okay, but we'll see.
Wonderful. And now for another question, another recommendation for a vaccine. This individual is contacting on behalf of their 65-year-old mother who got the double vaccine of Sinopharm, which is the Chinese vaccine. And they were wondering, now that they live in the States, which vaccine they should take, Pfizer or Moderna, since they're planning to stay in the United States on top of Sinopharm. What do you recommend?
Yeah, this is a very common issue for people coming from, have been in other countries for a while, where the Sinovac or Sinopharm, these are the Chinese vaccines, have been used extensively and are being used. I think all this person really needs is to take the Moderna vaccine. You're going to be taking multiple vaccines as this pandemic goes on. And, you need to keep a list of all the vaccines and the dates you took them and the lot numbers. This is going to be very important, but I think you don't have to start over again. You do have some immunity from these vaccines. They're not that great, but they do have some protection. look at China. Now, China has very draconian mitigation measures, but it's a very highly vaccinated country, and they've all taken these vaccines. So they work. I don't think they work as good as the mRNA vaccines, but we know that Moderna and Pfizer boosters work really well in people who've had other vaccines. In our case, it's just the J&J. In Europe, they also have the AstraZeneca, but they do get a benefit of those mix and matching the vaccine. So and then they'll have on their record that they had a Moderna vaccine, and that will be recognized, as one of the better vaccines, even though you're taking it just as a booster. So it'll be easier to travel to some countries.
Yeah, definitely. And now for our third question. This individual is a vaccinated woman who is currently breastfeeding her toddler and is wondering if the efforts in breastfeeding as a vaccinated individual makes any difference.
Well, that's a good question. You do get there is transfer of antibodies for COVID in breast milk, as other antibodies that the mother has as well. They cross the placenta and the babies get protection. That's very critical when kids are really young. As they get older and bigger, the amount of antibodies is probably not really very much. But the good news here is that it's expected that kids 6 months to 4 years of age will get EUA approval for the current vaccines sometime in the first quarter of 2022. That's very close. That's only 3 weeks away. So this situation is not going to go on very long, and then the child can get boosted, and you can forget all that. I don't think the amount of antibodies that are being transmitted, it depends on the age. We don't know how old the toddler is, but after 6 months or a year, you're probably not giving a whole lot of antibodies. And right now you need a lot of antibodies against Delta and Omicron. So it's probably not doing very much, but I can't say it's doing nothing. But this whole thing will be resolved in a matter of months.
Yeah, definitely. And now this question is rather long, so excuse me. My husband and I are over 65 and both have had Moderna vaccines as well as boosters in October. Last Thursday evening, they watched their 2-year-old granddaughter. Later, their grandson and daughter-in-law both came home vaccinated, and their grandson, who's now 5.5, received their second vaccination. They were just informed this morning, the husband was just informed this morning that their grandson tested positive via saliva test at school. Both the daughter-in-law and the granddaughter went and tested, and they are also both positive. The grandson and granddaughter are asymptomatic, but this man, who also is a high-risk patient, tested negative. What can you tell us a little bit about what he should do after receiving a PCR and getting negative for being a high-risk patient who is currently in cancer treatment?
Well, it's a very complicated story, but a very common story,
Right.
where you have family members that are getting breakthrough infections, or the unvaccinated children under 5, because there is no vaccine for them. They're getting infected in daycare or school or whatever it is, and then it's getting into the family unit. And there's always somebody who's immunocompromised or older in age, and these people are over 65, so that's one kind of strike against them. So what can you do? At this point, you need frequent testing until this whole thing has gone through the family unit. The high-risk person, and that would be this person and the husband, because they're over 65, if they do get infected, they can take the monoclonal antibodies because of their age. So they can take the monoclonal antibodies, or if there's probably not enough time for that yet in this particular case, but soon they're going to have those oral tablets, either from Merck or Pfizer, available. That's going to be approved pretty soon. But right now, they would be, if they do turn positive, they should go get that monoclonal antibody right away. And that will decrease their risk as well by a lot, by like 90%. So they should do that. There's also, this is a very important question, especially with the number of breakthroughs, and with Omicron, we think that there's going to be even more breakthroughs. So what do you do? So we have a study sponsored by the National Institutes for Health, the NIH. We've been looking at this for a couple months now, and we're just looking at really how risky it is. So if a person enters this study Everything is free, by the way. They even pay you $50 every time you have a PCR test, but you get 3 PCR tests over 2 weeks, and you get several antigen tests as well during the time. It's a rather intensive schedule, but it's not the real deep nasopharyngeal swab. It's just a little swab at the end of your nose. So it's really not as painful as those nasopharyngeal ones. And everything is free. And if anyone is interested in that, all they have to do is call our study hotline, which is 312-503-2564, and they'll explain everything to you. There's no obligation or anything like that. But that's kind of what you need to do. You want to do a PCR 3 to 5 days after the last exposure. And then you've got to, because you're exposed, you need to quarantine for at least 10 days. The recommendation is up to 14. It kind of depends how sick everybody is and everything. In the universities with the students who are generally healthy, we do a molecular test at day 7, usually get that result back the next day. And then what they call the primary contacts, like this person, then they can get out of quarantine a couple days earlier. But the formal recommendation is at least 10 days, and actually 14 days is what's written.
Right. Wonderful. And now for our last question. This person is an overweight 51-year-old that is unvaccinated. This individual got COVID and was hospitalized. When should this individual get the Pfizer vaccine? And do you recommend a C-reactive protein?
Yeah, this case brings up some very good points. She got a 51-year-old woman with fibromyalgia, so some kind of immunologic inflammatory type condition that we don't know much about. Did not take the vaccine because they were nervous about the inflammatory status. Now, inflammatory statuses are all over the place, especially people with rheumatoid arthritis and lupus and these other things, and they are all recommended to take it. No, not specifically for this particular person, but other inflammatory conditions, those people get vaccinated and they do it safely. Now, this person got COVID, so they're exposed to like tons of virus, much more virus than a vaccine. Vaccine is not even the virus, it's just a little part of the virus that's kind of manufactured by your own cells. So probably there's really no risk. Now, sounds like they want to take the Pfizer vaccine. Okay, great. This is a good idea, but you don't have to do it right away. The formal recommendation is wait until all your symptoms have completely resolved. And then you could take the vaccine. They don't put any time limit or anything like that on, but for all practicality, very few people have a relapse after severe COVID. This person was hospitalized in the first 3 months after infection. So you've got a couple months to wait, up to 3 months, but after that, people start having second infections. That's not a breakthrough, that's a secondary infection. So a second infection. So we would wait until, you could wait up until 3 months after you recover. So sometime in January or February, go ahead and get the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna, whatever you want. I would not take this person, I would not take the J&J vaccine. I think would not be optimal. And then the other question this person has, should they check their CRP, C-reactive protein level? We don't recommend that. I don't think that's going to make any decision at all in this particular case. They should just get vaccinated at that time.
Wonderful. Those are all of our COVID questions for today. Thank you, Dr. Murphy.
Okay, thank you. See you.